Comes at different height, but I've not Hello, welcome to another episode of the Pop Shock Podcast. This episode today is going to be a hyper-focused episode on one character who I'm glad to say has joined us today. He's missing an arm, but he's here. How much better would it be if Spider-Man was Irish? Like that'd be great, man.
That would definitely add a wee twist.
They should do a Spider. See, the thing is, I've always thought that, right? Like, see Spider-Man in Britain, not even just in Ireland, but anywhere like in Scotland, England, Wales. There's not really enough buildings for me to swing about.
It would find it very difficult.
Like, there's a lot of suburbs and low buildings, so you kind of guns. Do you know what I mean?
I know it would be quite hard to.
Only really works in like New York. But yes, today we are joined by. I'm going to give away Spider-Man's true identity here. I hope that's okay. We're joined by Jerd. How you doing, Jerd?
The audio wouldn't be great if I kept that up the whole time.
Chris. All right. And Chris is here.
I'm here too.
So, two Scott. Look at that. Mark's already.
There should definitely be more moments in the Spider-Man movies where he's like. and Green Goblin's like, what? What the hell are you saying?
We're all well accustomed to wearing masks now, so like they do muffle your voice.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah, no.
I'd be fucked. I'm a mumbler anyway, so like if I had to wear a mask all the time, I'd be like, oh, you wouldn't hear a thing.
So today we are doing a deep dive into Spider-Man, specifically the comics. We are asking the question, somebody comes up to you in the street, hey, you big famous comic podcaster man, I know you from things, you know stuff. Can you tell me where the best place to start reading blank character is? And today's blank character is Spider-Man. So somebody walks up to you and asks you, where do I start? What do you tell them? That is the question of the day. Jerd, I believe you're kind of going to lead us through this. You are out of the three of us, you're definitely the Spider-Man aficionado.
Spider-Man nut, yeah.
I'm the kind of guy. I'm the target audience. Then I'm the guy that's not really read.
You're the man on the street.
There you go.
There you go. You tell Chris.
Where do I start? Jim?
You tell him why.
So we're just so I have been obsessed with Spider-Man practically all of my life. Started with Batman and the Batman films and the cartoon.
Should we start with our history with the character? We will do that first, and then we'll dive in.
That's
so, Jerd,
point,
how did you first get into Spider-Man? And
so the 90s cartoon, like I'd say the vast majority of people our age who like Spider-Man. I had a lot of the Toy Biz toys. I was sickened that I sold them all, but I remember I had lots of different ones. But we had a shop growing up, so I used to go into the storeroom of the shop and kind of line up the boxes, and then I get like my dad was a fisher. So I'd get the fishing hook and the little bit of line, and I just get him to swing between the buildings.
Nice.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, I love the cartoons. My brother, as I probably mentioned this in nearly every episode, my brother bought all the comics coming into our house when we were growing up. So English reprints. A lot of my knowledge now from the comics comes from the English reprints of the American comics, which were a couple of months behind. They were, looking back now, it's kind of like they were like nearly a curated reading list for all characters. But my brother only got Marvel. So read like from the mid 90s, I was reading Spider-Man. So that's jumping between. So Spider-Man comics, there's Amazing Spider-Man, but then there's all these different Spider-Man runs that go alongside it. So they were all in those books. So most of my knowledge comes from that. And then just always liked the character. The Raimi films coming in then. Didn't pay much heed to the Amazing Spider-Man films. And I've just recently, I've probably mentioned before, it's only really in the last year or two I've really got back into reading comics. So like the comics I'll be talking about today are the ones that I've been researching myself to read, and I've only got really accustomed to Spider-Man in general in the last year or two. So yeah.
Cool. Chris, what were you? What's your history with Spider-Man?
Mine's is kind of on and off. The first time I kind of really came close to him was in the PS1 game.
Hell yeah! So that's where I was going.
Yeah.
In the 2000s, I was like, oh, this guy's amazing. He's red. He gets to jump between buildings. in the game you couldn't land in the street or you died. So,
Yeah.
there was like some
They wrote it in. I think Goblin had released a gas.
Gas,
You couldn't
yeah.
go below a certain point or something.
and you're like, what? And like that was the kind of introduction to the actual Marvel universe, because you had hints to Captain America, Punisher,
Mate,
and like
Yeah.
you
those were
forget
the
about
days.
that.
Those
You
were the
forget about
days
that.
where you could put whatever character in whatever piece
As
of
like a
media
wee
you wanted.
cameo, it's like,
It wasn't.
there you go.
It wasn't all this rights and arguing over whether Tom Holland's going to be Sony or Marvel or like. It was
No,
just
it
mate.
was
Do you
a
want to put
simpler time.
like
It was a simpler time.
in that game you had Beast, Punisher, Daredevil,
You did, you had
obviously Black Cat. You had all these characters,
Black
and it
Cat
was
was there
fantastic.
too.
They had the Fantastic
Yeah.
Four, the Baxter Building, and yeah,
And
Yeah.
they had all the villains as well. With it, even they had like Lizard. He was like a secret guy in the sewers. So you had to go and actually find him. He wasn't actually mentioned in the whole game.
right.
And you're like, oh, like everybody's in it. But then that's when I was kind of the game nut. And then when Sam Raimi came out, I watched these films and I was like, all right, okay, let's see what Spider-Man actually is. And then I watched the actual cartoons. And then again, so I was kind of late to the party, but yeah, I've not really read Spider-Man at all, so I'm looking forward to this episode. But
Mhm.
I'm more of a film Spider-Man than a comic guy. So be lovely. What about you? Did I steal your answer, Dan? Is that what?
No, see, to be honest, when I was young, it was a mix of things. It was that game, that Neversoft game, was a big influence.
Big
Kind of, I played that to death. I played that about 5 times, 6 times. Which, when you're young, to finish a game that many times is quite a lot. I also had tons, as Jerd was saying, tons of toys, Spider-Man toys, Doc Ock, Green Goblin, all the figures. And then obviously the merchandise in the Sam Raimi films hit kind of us at a peak time. I mean, the first one came out in 2001.
2002, I think is the first one.
I would have been 6 or 7 years old, that's prime audience. Do you know what I mean for a Spider-Man movie coming out? So that was kind of all of that at once. So it wasn't really like, oh, I just knew him for the games, or I just knew him for the movies, or I just knew him for the cartoon. It was kind of all of that, and the toys. You know, just Spider-Man was just, I had t-shirts, bed sheets, you know, merchandise. And then it wasn't until I got a bit older, I don't know, 15, 16, when I was like, right, let's read this guy's actual source material, let's dive into the comics. And probably like what we were discussing today, I probably just Googled best place to start reading Spider-Man. I think around the time I got into it, J. Michael Straczynski's run wasn't that far in the past. I think the current run when I got into Spider-Man comics wise was probably Superior Spider-Man. I think that was what was happening.
Yeah.
I think that's what was happening at the time, but I didn't dive in there because I thought Doc Ock's and Spider-Man's heats, like that's too inside baseball to start with. I need to start with, you know. So I went back and kind of bought a lot of the classics, Kraven's Last Hunt, The Night Gwen Stacy Died. I bought all those kind of stories. Yeah, and then I was like, oh, the Ultimate run's a thing as well, so start reading that kind of concurrently with the Straczynski run and things like that. But yeah, that was kind of my introduction to the character in terms of comics. And then we also had the Tom Holland films, which are going strong. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm looking forward to No Way Home.
Oh, big time. Big time. I'm just dying for. I don't even care about the next trailer. I just want to fucking see it. I just like, what is going on?
Yeah, I saw. I won't talk about it too much here, but I saw Eternals last night, and it was great. It was fine. It was entertaining. But the whole time, I'm just thinking, see, knowing that Spider-Man's the next one after this, I don't really care about this. That was in the back of my head the whole film. I'm like, this is fine, but I just want to get to Spider. I was kind of like, I was getting through this because I know that the next time I'm going to see a Marvel film, it will be Spider-Man. Do you know what I mean? That was in my mind the whole time.
Is it December? Is that when it's coming out? Yeah.
Yeah.
December 17th. I don't think there's any changes to that. They would have announced it by now, I believe.
Yeah. Although, sorry to sidetrack again, but just when we're talking about it, have you heard the rumour about the trailer? Apparently, the reason that we haven't gotten a second trailer yet, we should have got it, it should be out. The reason that we don't have it yet is because Sony want to show Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire in the next trailer.
Oh.
And Marvel are fighting to keep that a secret until you go and see it.
See.
Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I think Sony are pushing that because that's their characters and merchandise and all the rest of it. And I think Marvel are saying, no, that's a big reveal. We need to save that for when you're in the cinema. Don't know if it's true. It might be bullshit. I don't know,
Yeah.
but that's the rumor. That's why we've not got a second trailer apparently.
It's funny. I was watching the YouTubers. They're kind of like an Avengers of YouTubers. I might have mentioned them before. Absolutely Marvel and DC. There's like comic guy from Comic Pop, guy from Comics Explained, who used to just like dramatically read stories. It's actually a handy way if you don't want to read stuff and just watch the YouTube videos. But they were just talking about the amount of people who've made entire like YouTube careers, like making multiple videos a day about rumors about Spider-Man. So
Oh yeah,
I'm kind of getting a bit sick of that now, to be honest. Because I keep seeing them
Yeah.
come up. I'm like, say you're going to say whatever you want, but there's no fucking, we won't know until it's out.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still dying to see it. I have like really extensively looked over the Tom Holland films, and I see them just as like there's some really good stuff, there's some really bad stuff, but
Yeah.
if they can put the emphasis that they put into, like if they just really bear down and focus on it, this could be fantastic. Now the idea that Spider-Man's beaten practically all of its classic villains, so the only MCU ones are Vulture and Mysterio, which we never seen before, but he's meeting all his classic villains as like sloppy seconds.
Yeah.
But we don't know. The stuff from the Morlun trailer, not Morlun. We'll talk about him in a bit. Morbius trailer.
I was going to mention that, because Vulture's in that, I believe. Like
Vulture's in that.
So
He
Morbius
calls
could be
himself
in.
Venom.
Yeah, he says I am Venom at
He
one
says
point.
I am Venom.
There's the Daily Bugle from the Venomverse. Then there's the Sam Raimi Spider-Man poster, which is actually from the PS4 game in the background.
But the Oscott building is the same Oscott building from the Amazing Spider-Man movie.
Amazing Spider-Man.
Oh,
so what I'm kind of thinking is, since that comes out afterwards,
what is going on?
what they could be doing there is that when the end of No Way Home could have just bring in a load of universes together, which is messy as fuck. It could just be like the thing in the comics from a couple of years ago where there was Secret Wars, and they just brought a load of universes together, and then the way Marvel kind of does retcons is small, but it really is like there really is a true line in the 616. So that's in the comics. That's what they call the main Marvel universe. There's a true line, really. Like they do update stuff, but it's not like DC where they just set up an entirely new universe. Even though that does happen, which is probably the first thing we'll talk about, first comic run we'll talk about. But what I'm thinking is they're probably just going to draw it all in together. But at the same time, they could just be. It's Sony, like they just fucking make no sense. And
well,
this is all.
That's my take on it. Like as you're saying, Jerd, there's people analysing it and talking about how does this going to. And in my mind, I'm just like, I don't care. Like, see these Venom movies, Morbius movies, the Craven the Hunter movie with Aaron Johnson. I'm just like, I don't give a shit, man. Just let Spider-Man be an Avengers character. Let him make his cameos in the Avengers movies or in other, Doctor Strange 2 or whatever the hell it shows up in, and just let the people that know what they're doing handle it. Just let Feige and what's his name, Watts, the director, just let him make their movies, man. Why did he? Well, I know why he interfered because money, but it's just I don't know, man. It's just a drag. It's like what Morbius and Michael Keaton showing up in Morbius and the Venom movie and how the second Venom movie ended, which I don't want to spoil that here, but just all that shit, I'm like, who cares? Like, who gives a shit? I'm over it. I don't know.
I think the perfect solution would be to just have another. Let Sony have their own Spider-Man, and then let Marvel do their own, and like let them keep doing the deal they're doing now, where like it's co-produced, fucking profits go to each of them, but just let Sony do their own Spider-Man. They can fuck it up completely. I don't know. Venom 2, I couldn't even finish Venom 1. Venom 2, I just thought it was shite. You're introducing a character who's inherently linked to Spider-Man, which again we'll come back to later. All of his villains having like their own solo films before they but at the same time, once they actually introduce him to Tom Holland, I wouldn't be surprised if they do it well. Like that could happen. Even though right now it just seems really fucking messy how they're doing it. But yeah.
I think it'll be a teaser. It'll be a teaser to see if people like it or not, and then they'll snap the fingers, saying, "Oh, the Doctor Strange has repaired the universe," and then kicked everybody else out. I think.
Well, that's what I was saying. We were talking when the No Way Home trailer came out. We were kind of speaking about it, and
Mm,
that's what I said at the time. The problem with introducing a multiverse, right, is you kind of write yourself into a corner. It's like, where do you go for there? Because either you keep going, you get more and more complex. There's more and more layers to this multiverse, and then you end up like the comics, over convoluted, and people don't know where to start. And it's like, oh god, like
Yeah.
if somebody's a casual Marvel film, you can't bring a pal that's only seen. Maybe he's not seen an MCU movie since the first Avengers. You can't bring him to see the 28th movie in the series. Do you know what I mean? If we start going into the multiverse,
Yeah.
the other side of the coin is, well, how do you close the multiverse? You can't just, now that you've opened it, you can't just be like, snap fingers, done, that's the way, it's just not
Yeah.
it. Like, I wonder, I'm like, where are they going to go for here?
It becomes a thing then too, where it's like, as someone said, some other YouTuber. I listen to a lot of YouTubers and podcasters who talk about Spider-Man, but it's technically in the MCU, Spider-Man now is dealing with the multiverse. That multiverse story only came into the comics like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
They've like bypassed a lot of stuff, and then from now on, people will always be like, "Oh, Spider-Man multiverse." That's inherently linked to his character.
Yeah.
It isn't. There's a lot of comics before that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think it's a good point to move on to get into it. Where I would think with Spider-Man, and I was talking to a guy in a comic book shop about it recently. I wouldn't really think Spider-Man has an awful lot of graphic novels where you can just pick up Spider-Man, and that's probably the issue that people have when they're going to read Spider-Man, is that it's very convoluted. All of the stories, there's stuff with the Clone Saga in the 90s, which is one of the most notoriously bad Spider-Man stories because it was supposed to go for 6 months, it went for 4 years. Very convoluted. That's where I kind of came in and read it. Like, if I was to try and say, oh, this is a great Spider-Man story, I would struggle sometimes. But where I would say, what Marvel did when the Raimi films came out, so in 2000, Spider-Man stories were very convoluted. So their opportunity, I don't even think it was supposed to replace. So again, as I mentioned, the Marvel 616 universe, there's a true line going back to the 60s. Technically, all those things happened, but it makes no sense because the time scale in Marvel, like, I think the way they have it now, even going back to the 60s, it's only supposed to be about 10 years. So technically, all of those stuff happened. All of those things happened that happened in all those stories in the 60s, the 70s, the 90s, and the noughties, and into now. So depending on the writer, they will pick it up and go, "Oh yeah, all this happened." But like, you just kind of have to see it as an overall of this, because we're jumping between not an awful lot of different universes. Some of them are treated as that. Like, this is like a what if story, an alternate reality. The story that's happening here. Yeah. But when the Raimi films came out, and I think actually the Ultimate Spider-Man, which I think is the best way if you want to pick up a story where it's Spider-Man and it's down to the core of the character. Because I would say with all these stories, you're kind of jumping in and you're getting snapshots of the character and what he's like, the sense of him. So Ultimate Spider-Man, I think Dan is going to show, Volume 1. That came out just before the Raimi films, I think, or it was around that time. But it was brought about to be a jumping on point. And I think maybe potentially it was supposed to replace the 616 universe, but they decided not to. So it's written by Brian Michael Bendis. It's drawn by Mark Bagley. I think it's been surpassed now by Dan Slott, but at one time it was the longest run of Spider-Man. It's like 100 issues, same writer, same artist.
2003 it was.
Okay, 2003. So yeah, it was kind of with the idea of Spider-Man film was really popular. Like around 2002, we need... That's my sense of it anyway. This is a jumping on point. So what it does is it has alternate takes on stuff from the main continuity. It changes things about a bit. It simplifies stuff. It streamlines everything.
Yeah.
It's Spider-Man also in the 2000s. He's in the noughties. So he's kind of updated. He's a little bit different from the classic run, which we'll get back into. We'll talk about next, actually. But yeah, it's if you want to read a big chunk of Spider-Man that you can start without having to know anything, like any kind of ideas you have from the cartoons or the film, from the cartoons, the films, or anything like that, they will help you in this. I would nearly treat it as it's like just think of it as nearly picking up like the MCU or watching the films. Spider-Man, you kind of have an idea about what it was like, but you just want a kind of self-contained world. It goes on for 100 issues. It's some of it, like I would have in the past, I would have had issues with it where it's like, it's not the main universe Spider-Man, it's a different reality Spider-Man. But if you just treat all of this stuff, and I think with all nerd stuff, treat it just whatever you're reading, you might pick it up, there might be a character, you have no idea who they are, just go hit the ground running, just like don't worry too much about knowing who's who. But this does reintroduce everybody, does some things a bit differently. Like Norman Osborn is a big giant Hulk monster in this. He's not the kind of Halloween costume looking Norman Osborn.
Oh wow.
There he is, yeah, and he throws like fireballs. Okay, like that's one thing where I'm like, I wish it was a bit. I wish it was a bit more like the normal universe, but yeah, it's just a big ass chunk of really well written, really well drawn. Well, Mark Bagley, I wouldn't even say Mark. I wouldn't look at Mark Bagley and be like, oh my god, it's the most amazing art ever. It's very serviceable. It's very consistent. It has a great look to it. But it's pretty simple. It's not like over the top. There's some naughty stuff that's in there. Just, like even with the Raimi films, there's some like homophobic jokes here and there that you're like, oh, that aged terribly. But it's just it's a big ass solid chunk of Spider-Man. It runs in line a lot with the classic stories, like going back to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. It takes elements from them. And even the Raimi films do that too. They have the classic characters. Dan, do you have any particular points on it?
I think my main issue with recommending that as the first one is just what you said about it being, although it is a good Spider-Man run and it gives a good understanding of the character, it's not the main Spider-Man. So it's like the Ultimate Spider-Man run, I really like it, I enjoy it, but it is, in my mind, the way that Batman New 52 is to original continuity Batman. Do you know what I mean? It's a nice extension, alternate take on the character, but it's not the main version of the character. So that would be the only kind of caveat I would say. Don't expect the total. If you want a traditional Spider-Man run, this probably isn't it. But it's a real told story. The art's great. It's entertaining. It has some good issues and some bad issues, but for the most part, the quality is pretty high. It doesn't really have a dip, I wouldn't say. It's pretty consistently solid throughout.
See, that's one thing I think people get, like, they get narrowed zoned when they're watching the movies. They think Tom Holland's the only kind of guy, like, at the moment now. He's the only story. Tobey Maguire was the only Spider-Man story. Like, you were talking about, like, this one's going to be like the core of the character, but there's other ones that have totally different. Like, this one has, like, the Green Goblin, who's like the kind of like horns and stuff like that. Yeah. That's no my Green Goblin. I remember like Green Goblins that he's like just a skinny guy on a kind of hoverboard. so it's like, all right, okay, but like it shows you there's so many like it's hard to actually pick a starting point. You just need to jump in sometimes because like you will. It's like you attract the ones that you like to go to.
The nice thing about the Ultimate Spider-Man run, although like we were discussing before we started recording, there is more than one Ultimate run, which is a bit confusing. Yeah. But that Ultimate run that we're talking about, the good thing about that is, see if you're going to start like seriously collecting them, you can just get the trades, just Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4, and just read through them. It's not like I think we're going to later talk about G. Michael Straczynski's run, which splits off into different side stories and crossovers and events, books, and what if, and whereas the Ultimate Spider-Man run, you buy the first 8 volumes, that's you've got a story, like for beginning. And then if you enjoyed that, first kind of part, I think there's how many is there in total? 16, I want to say. However many there is, 20. I don't know how many. Well,
I would say the trades of Ultimate Spider-Man are harder to get. I don't think that all of the original like Marvel have that issue where just certain trades aren't reprinted. Like you could probably get them as omnibuses, but I don't like, because I have the one you showed there, Volume 1. Yeah. I have like 1 to 15, but I'm kind of aware that I was very lucky because I bought them secondhand. They didn't actually. Marvel have that issue where they don't reprint stuff. So for all of this, all comic book reading, especially when it comes to Marvel, I would suggest Marvel Unlimited, which if you have a tablet or you can do it on your phone. you can get like, it's maybe, I can't remember exactly how it works out. It's like $12 or $10 to pay for a month. I've paid 60. If you really want to get invested in Marvel, I paid like, I think it works out about, for me it's about €60. I've paid that for a year's subscription.
Yeah.
So with some of the trades that are kind of harder to get and it's very costly, so I would suggest Marvel Unlimited for all of this, especially for jumping in and around.
Well, I think that's a good shout if you want to go digital. Personally, I'm more a physical guy. I like sitting reading the book. I would say that though, if that's the route you want to go, I'd say eBay's your friend. Don't get too hung up on getting a brand new. No, that's how I went about it.
Ebay's
Don't
a good
get
shout.
don't get too hung up on getting yourself a brand new book. Sometimes you'll get lucky. You will get one that's still in the cellophane. But see, for the most part, if you want to just enjoy these stories, things like
The digital
eBay and then other kind of online sellers, I think are the best way to go. I mean, I picked up those books £3, £4 ago. Like,
Yeah.
most of them for under a £5 each. And okay, if you're buying 20 volumes, I suppose that adds up. But see if you can kind of incrementally do it over time, you can get a fair kind of bit of the story for without breaking the bank. That's unless you want to go digital. If you're okay going digital, I'd definitely say
Well, I also kind of like the idea too of like, because it would be impossible to buy everything.
Oh yeah,
Marvel Unlimited is a good way to, if there's a story you've read that you really like, then go and pick it up. But digital is like, especially if you're just starting out and you just want to try some stuff, like, because if you were to pick up a trade and then you're not that gone on it, it's like, they can be pricey. But like, it's secondhand stuff, eBay. I didn't even think of that. Facebook Marketplace is where I buy all my secondhand books. But that's another good shout too, actually.
And Amazon actually, I think, sell used books now as well.
So what's the next one? Tell me, what's the next one? It's Ultimate Spider-Man. What's the next one?
Ultimate Spider-Man, and then this one, like, nearly all of these come with a caveat. This one is the original Amazing Spider-Man, which actually, so the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko. Now this is only if you can stomach classics, but even some people don't even like reading older novels, and especially comics when you go back to the 60s, they're written for kids back then, so they're quite dopey. But I don't read all classics, or if I do read classics, it takes me a lot longer to read them. But the core of Spider-Man is very well, and like you would see if you were to read Ultimate Spider-Man, and I guess with a lot of these, don't worry about reading one version that's going to maybe spoil something, because just think of it as just, you can read it in one way, you get a sense, then you can come back in and you can go read it in, like say if you read it in the Ultimate Spider-Man, you're going to get a certain sense of, think of that more nearly like watching a film up version of it. But then if you go back and read the classics, you will kind of know what's going to happen in some cases, but just treat it as like you read the Ultimate, then you go back and read it in the classics, you're getting the same story, but it's kind of maybe more stretched out a bit. Just the art's great. Even just more as a kind of nearly like historical thing. If you were to read, if you read them and like them, if you read the first 100 issues of Amazing Spider-Man, but also he starts in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, it's very antiquated, but I think there is merit to reading them. If you try the classics and you like them, there's definitely a merit to reading them. The art's still great. It's kind of weird, Steve Ditko stuff.
Talking about trades, I was looking for it there, but I can't find it. I have a trade that is just the classic Daily Adventures of Spider-Man, I think it's called, by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and it is just a collection of that whole kind of era. I think it goes from the origin up until roughly Gwen Stacy.
Really?
Oh, that's a long time.
That's
so
it's kind of like, it's like a mini omnibus. It's not. To be honest, I don't think it's also got everything. I think it's highlights. I think it does skip around a wee bit, but it gives you the gist of the whole kind of Spider-Man's origin to the first introduction of the Green Goblin and different villains up until he meets kind of Gwen Stacy. It kind of goes through that whole era, and it's I think the version I've got is the noir version, so it's black and white, but it's cool. It's good.
Yeah, like even if I was skimming over the covers there of the first say 30 issues, and like by issue 12 you've got nearly all of his like a lot of his classic, like Doc Ock is, I think the first actual supervillain he fights is like the Chameleon who appeared in the cartoon. But you get Doc Ock, you get Lizard, you get Vulture, by issue 30 you've also got like the Rhino. Maybe, I don't know if Shocker's a little bit later, but then you've Green Goblin. Like, you have a lot of his classics, and then with all of these runs, you know, Spider-Man will go on for a couple of years. They get convoluted. They'll bring in new villains. Some of them don't have any staying power, so they'll go back to his classics. So, you know, some people, you're both more kind of DC guys, would say that Batman is the best rogues gallery. I don't think he does. I think it's Spider-Man.
No,
I think it's
Spider, like I would say it's like they're kind of equal in a sense.
Yeah,
Like,
I'd say it's a
I
toss
think
up. Yeah.
I think Spider Man's probably got the best out of all Marvel because you've just name dropped a couple. Shocker, I
Oh
forgot
yeah,
he
100%.
exists, and like Lizards. Like, you've got all these characters that I feel that I know, even though I don't know I know their names and I kind of have an idea of what they look like. Like, I feel like if you said that with Captain America, the really big one is like Red Skull.
yeah, Captain America is kind of lacking,
yeah,
Yeah.
so
kind of famously.
it's like, oh, right, okay,
Zemo.
so, and Zemo, yeah, but he's kind of, I don't know, he's kind of merged amongst them all. But yeah, I would say Spider Man is. There's a debate there. I don't know why you went to that one.
I think for
But
me,
it could
as like
be a good debate. That.
for comic, when it comes to comic
That's a
books,
good topic. We should do that.
I heard someone say like that, like Batman's villains are like they're mainly just different guys in suits.
Yeah.
But like, I know Joker, I can't say the Joker isn't one of the greatest villains ever. Is he been overused a lot in the last couple of years? Yes.
Yeah.
Is he sometimes often way too dramatic or whatever? Not dramatic, but he's just too edgy or whatever. But for me, when it comes to like comic books, like I'm not really happy with a comic book or a comic book film if it's an hour in or whatever, it's a couple of issues in, and you're not seeing that much action. Like comic books, these are people with extraordinary abilities that can knock the shit out of people. That action is really cool. I come at that in a really popcorn way. Nearly all like Spider-Man villains, like Norman Osborn, he's not exactly. I think Norman Osborn, like, you know, he probably was seen as like a rip off of the Joker. He's kind of Halloween themed and whatever. He's that kind of jokey thing. But Norman Osborn is like a badass, really. Like, to me, if people were to say who's Spider-Man's main villain, it's Norman Osborn for me. Like, and a lot of that, which is we're kind of moving. Like, Doc Ock is another one. And like Doc Ock would have featured a lot more. So it's really is. It's kind of like the Raimi films cover the classics, the 60s stuff. It's, you know, Doc Ock, Norman Osborn. For me, it's Norman Osborn. I think he's had more of an, like, from what I've read, is more of an effect on Spider-Man.
I personally prefer Doc Ock, but
yeah,
I'd say in terms of what you were just talking about there with Norman Osborn, I'd say he's a better villain than Green Goblin. Like, Green Goblin himself is a bit one-dimensional, I think, but when you start bringing in, like, when Norman Osborn becomes what's the Iron Man suit he eventually gets?
The Iron Patriot.
The Dark Avengers, the Iron Patriot. When that kind of whole thing takes place, it's like, he is actually... He's kind of like what Reed Richards is in the comic to the protagonists, Norman Osborn is to the antagonists. Do you know what I mean? He's kind of this mastermind.
Yeah. Well, he kind of like that. We maybe come back to that. Because that kind of comes. That was like a big difference where Norman Osborn became like a full-on universe villain, like an Avengers villain.
Yeah.
Like after the Avengers film.
I personally think that elevated him from what it was before. From the cackling guy on the glider.
Yeah, but see, like that's the next point and kind of area that I'm going to come into is now I'm a bit confused in this because I was reading it over, and this is when I would have probably really started reading comics. So just to skip, like, because I haven't read an awful lot of them, but just kind of skim over, some people would probably not be happy with, to skim over the 70s and the 80s. So going from the classics, Steve Ditko drew Spider-Man. He was this. That's the kind of how Spider-Man became. This is actually Steve Ditko. Is like he was this. I could be wrong if I am. Oh well. He was this slinky kind of like, and especially like this figure kind of gets it across. This kind of slinky, and to go back into what we mentioned in the last episode, Sam Raimi brought in the horror elements. Steve Ditko brought in the horror elements. He was atypical. He was a teenage. He was the first like teenage hero who read a book by himself. After Steve Ditko left, John Romita Sr. came in, and he drew the more muscular kind of classic hero type Spider-Man. There's a lot of stuff there. Honestly, I haven't read an awful lot of it. So you got the night Gwen Stacy died. Also, wasn't it just after the night Gwen Stacy died that Norman Osborn died in the 70s? I'm going to skip over a lot of like the 80s stuff, like 70s stuff. So there's like that's where Venom came in. There was a writer called Roger Stern who did a lot of really popular runs. But for me, where I came into it was Norman Osborn was basically dead from like the 70s to the 90s. He came back in the 90s. Or maybe the 80s. And I know Harry Osborn was Green Goblin for a while. There's a lot of issues there that I'm just not in my experience. So where I came into it, I even came into it after Venom, after Carnage, which was like a lot of Todd McFarlane. So there was the Black Suit, there was Secret Wars. But when I came into it was around the time Howard Mackey was doing it. And it was a mixture of being drawn by John Romita Jr., who for me is my mind's eye Spider-Man. Like for me, if I'm reading a Spider-Man book that's drawn by John Romita Jr., I'm happy. So Howard Mackey was the writer, John Romita Jr. was the artist, and this is Peter Parker Spider-Man, which is the book was called. It was relaunched. That's where Norman really when Norman came back, there was a lot like it was just a lot of years where it was Spider-Man. Like there was the Clone Saga in the 90s, which was also kind of messy, but there was a lot of years where Norman was fighting Spider-Man, and that's for me is when he became, in my reading, like that's where I have this real big experience with Norman. There's a lot of different stories there. There's the Gathering of the Five, where Norman was like magical stones, MacGuffin's thing, and there was like gifts for each person. One of them was supposed to get mad power. Norman, well, actually, I won't go into the spoilers of that, but Norman came back, and then that kind of came back in at the end of the Clone Saga. The Clone Saga is a whole mess. I'd say go what we're telling you, and then go back and try the Clone Saga. There was a period of time where Ben Reilly, who was a clone of Peter Parker, who at one point was like, oh no, he's actually was the original Peter Parker, so he took over Peter Parker, which is actually happening now in the comics for kind of different reasons. So Ben Reilly came back, and Norman Osborn came back, and then Peter Parker eventually took up the role again. So there is some 90s stuff there where it's a lot of Peter versus Norman Osborn, and really, for me, that's what cemented Norman as his arch villain, because I was like non-existent when Gwen Stacy died, so there's a lot there that I missed. And then it's convoluted, but that was the 90s convoluted, so that's where Norman became for me.
I can't recommend the Clone Saga.
Huh?
I can't recommend the Clone Saga.
Yeah, you gotta skip over it. Like really, there's good bits in it. So like one thing I was going to mention just briefly in the 90s, there was the Onslaught Saga, and a lot of the stuff, which was an X-Men crossover event, a lot of the stuff that I read in the 90s, I read in a vacuum because I read them as a kid. I enjoyed them at the time. I haven't gone back to reread them. But the Onslaught Saga had, like, when you have these big events, there's tie-ins. And just to briefly mention on the Ben Reilly Spider-Man, there was an issue, like 2-issue tie-in of Ben Reilly Spider-Man where Onslaught was an amalgamation of Xavier and Magneto and made this whole other separate, super powerful being, which I think was all an editorial thing just to relaunch their comics. So in the 90s, Spider-Man and X-Men were selling like gangbusters, but like Cap, the Avengers, all the super popular characters now weren't selling. So they decided to revamp them and give them to artists like what's his name? The really edgy guy who can't draw feet.
Rob Liefeld.
Rob Liefeld. So when there's a whole, just to kind of skim over really quickly, there was in the 90s a lot of the really popular edgy artists left Marvel to make Image Comics.
More pouches.
Huh?
More pouches,
yeah. Rob Liefeld. It's a lot of the 90s imagery of like pouches everywhere was Rob Liefeld. So I was getting away from this. So the Onslaught Saga was basically just to relaunch the poorly selling comics in a different universe. It failed. They brought them back in. But the tie-ins, the Spider-Man tie-ins to the Onslaught, because I don't think he was really a big part of that story, was the Ben Reilly Onslaught had commandeered all the Sentinels. So New York was just Sentinels everywhere. In Central Park, Onslaught had his big magical palace, and there was Sentinels everywhere. Spider-Man can't relate to the Ben Reilly Spider-Man. He had a cool costume. You can look it up. There's just like 2 issues where he's taking down Sentinels. So like Spider-Man, he's a great fighter and everything. He's really strong, but he's not really able to take down that many Sentinels. So it's just like Spider-Man taking down like 2 Sentinels or 3 Sentinels.
Mm-hmm.
And around that time, there was another character who I think in the Dan Slott run became one of the versions of Hobgoblin. But at this time he was kind of they'd started a miniseries where he found one of Norman Osborn's old caches of Goblin gear, and he also took down like 2 or 3 Sentinels. So you'd have to kind of find that's the Green Goblin miniseries. I think there's only like 4 issues, but he basically just fights 3 or 4 Sentinels. So
That's
that's
actually a good. Well, how strong is Spider-Man? I just assumed he's like a little bit stronger than a normal person, but when I'm thinking in the movies,
oh no.
Oh no.
he did grab that fucking hell, I've lost it, the Winter Soldier's hand. So like he did stop it. So
Mate,
he is strong.
he held a ferry together.
I know, but like I'm thinking like if he's beating a Sentinel, like how fucking massive, like he can
Oh,
hold a shit.
Spider-Man is much stronger than a person. He famously pulls his punches.
Yes. Yeah.
So like
Oh right, okay. So
he literally,
he doesn't
if he
hit
punched
100%.
anyone,
He would
which it
kill him.
comes in the Dan Slott run, to jump ahead really quickly, the Dan Slott run, a big part of that is Superior Spider-Man. Doc Ock does this thing to get he technically kills Spider-Man. Like this my podcast thing is doing here quotes. He technically kills Spider-Man, but what he does is he transfers his consciousness into Spider-Man's body, and Peter Parker's consciousness just disappears. But when Doc Ock, so Doc Ock, Spider-Man, whatever, is fighting like Scorpion, who is a superpowered being, he's fighting him, he gets annoyed, and he just like punches him as hard as he can, and he punches Scorpion's jaw off. So that really just telegraphed the size that Spider-Man is like crazy strong. In somewhere in that Scott Hanna run in the 90s, there's an issue where I think it is related to Norman Osborn, where the Daily Bugle building is like falling down and Spider-Man holds it up by himself. So Spider-Man is like, if you say like in terms of X-Men, he's probably not that much weaker than Colossus. And I think if you there's really elements of Spider-Man where, and it's a very common trope. You've seen it in Homecoming where Spider-Man is like trapped under the big vent thing, and he's like, "Come on, Spider-Man! Come on, Spider-Man!" What that actually is, that's a homage to John Romita Sr., who's the guy who I mentioned who drew Spider-Man really heroically. And I think it's one of the first times it happened. He has this medicine for Aunt May, but Doc Ock has trapped him in this place, and the water is flooding, which is kind of similar in the film.
He sees a reflection as well, and the same as in the movie.
Yeah.
He looks at his reflection, and yeah, it's the same shot.
He sees the mask, and then like the really iconic image you might see, even just Google images of Spider-Man, is him just lifting up this thing, and I'm really showing off how unlike Spider-Man I am. But Spider-Man when he gets into a position where he is, severely motivated by, if he doesn't do this, he can get way stronger than he normally is. But even when he's normally interacting, he doesn't have like, he pulls himself back, or he holds himself back a lot. He's way stronger than, as a guy who fights criminals all the time. He's not really, he could be fighting, like, and there is other elements where he's fought people who, comics wise or power level wise, people would think, oh, he can't really beat him, but when he's pushed, he's even stronger than, and he's definitely, like, he's crazy strong.
He's much more stronger than just a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
I think he's very reactionary as well in that sense. Spider-Man, like Jerd saying, if there's nothing on the line, then he maybe couldn't lift a building. But if it was somebody like Aunt May was trapped under it, then he probably could. Do you know what I mean? His powers are kind of really reactionary to the situation, I think, a lot of the time.
He can
makes him very human, though, doesn't it? Makes him very human. Like if you're yourself, if you're emotionally invested in something, you try and push yourself up.
Yeah.
That's probably why he's really relatable as well. That's amazing. Sorry,
I think the thing of the mother lifting the car. When there's some story about like a kid trapped under a car, and the mother is able to lift the car and get this superhuman level of strength or whatever in times of dire need. So that's kind of bed into it, but that's a very big trope in Spider-Man, that like he'll be thinking of all the things that'll happen if he doesn't do this thing, and then he just like finds these extra reserves of strength.
Right. So if you don't want to read old-timey old Spider-Man from the 60s, if you don't want to read Clone Saga, Hunters of Pouches Spider-Man, and you don't want to read Ultimate Spider-Man, which is a kind of side story, where do you start with modern day Spider-Man, like post 2000? Where do you go?
Oh, post 2000. So I would say that just in the 90s, that Howard Mackie, anything with John Romita in the 90s, you're going to have a bit of fun with. But I think it comes into the next one, which I would say is arguably the best Spider-Man run of modern times. I know there's some other ones afterwards, but you get a big chunk of Spider-Man in it. The J.M. Michael Straczynski and John Romita Jr. one, and I could have been saying dates on other ones, but this starts at... Okay, so Amazing Spider-Man runs from the 60s to now, but there's been lots of times where there's been new volumes and they renumber it. So
Mm-hmm.
going by Amazing Spider-Man, it starts at 471, but in
Yes.
volume 2, it's also counted as 30.
36, yeah, something
30,
like that.
30,
Yeah.
30 31, I think. And then, Dan, I believe you have the start of that run there.
I don't have Coming Home as the first volume, which is a brilliant story. I really like Coming Home. This is part 2 and 3. This is Revelations and Until the Stars Turn Cold.
Okay.
I do have the first volume, but I don't know what it is.
But even if you hold that right up to the camera, that cover, see, it's a bit shiny. Like, that's one of the best images of Spider-Man ever. Like, and as I said,
okay.
John
Good
Romita
cover.
Jr., I think he's got a bit of slack now. He draws Superman, or was drawing Superman recently.
I don't love Romita Junior's art. I'm one to kind of slag him off sometimes. And
Oh no,
his
I love
faces
it.
look
He's
similar,
my mind's eye Spider-Man.
but he's a type of artist. In certain books, he works perfectly. I think in Daredevil, when he did Man Without Fear, I don't think another artist could have done anywhere close to his work in that book. And I think the same in this run, this Nicholas Straczynski run. No one else could have captured so many parts of that as well as he did. I think he was the man for the job.
Yeah.
And I also really like his Doc Ock. I love the way he draws Octavius. Octavius.
Kind of hard to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's really dynamic. His art's really dynamic. Like the way he draws the arms smashing through things, and I think you really feel the movement of it all. And yeah,
it's a very particular look to it. Like, and again, it's not like, to me though, that is like, that just is my, like, most, again, he also did it in the Scott Hand and stuff. He's kind of, in some ways, he's similar to David Byrne. Is it David Byrne? No. John Byrne. Yeah, I was Googling that earlier, and I was like, why am I seeing things about the Talking Head?
David Byrne's the guy from Talking Heads, right?
Yeah. But, yeah, I think he just but he changed also, because he would have drawn, like, a lot of X-Men in the late 80s, 90s, and he used to draw his characters a lot more blockier, but then, what I mean, block, he still draws them blockier, but draws them blocky isn't big, but then he, like, with Spider-Man, he draws them really slim. And the John Romita Sr., who I mentioned, is his father, who was the guy who drew Spider-Man really heroically after Steve Ditko. And then, it's funny, his son then changed it and became, for me anyway, I think I've just read so much Spider-Man that he drew, that he brings him back. It's very similar to, like, this figure, how he's presented. That's kind of, you're seeing the kind of blockiness of it. This is, just as figure-wise, this is my knockoff. They call him the Pizza Spider-Man, which Marvel Legends figures, they make these molds, and they kind of use them. They'll repeat the same mold over and over again. Yeah. This is a knockoff. His arm broke from me playing with him, and I can't find it. I have to get a new Spider-Man figure. I need more of them. So James Michael Straczynski, it was a screenwriter first.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah,
Babylon 5 he wrote.
All right, okay.
And then he moved into comics. That was a jump.
Yeah, there's a lot that happens, like, sometimes in bigger and smaller pieces. But so he wrote Spider-Man for 6 years. So again, volume 2, you're looking, it's called issue 30, or in the grand scheme of, so when they reissued them with numbers, they always revert back to the original Spider-Man numbering. So it's, I think it's best to try and stick with that. But that's 471 Amazing Spider-Man. There's a lot of stuff there. It ends kind of famously badly, which is another. So there's Clone Saga is one of the worst stories. Brand New Day?
One More Day.
One More Day. So we don't have to go into it exactly, but it ends terribly. It was more of an editorial choice. And J.M. Michael Straczynski actually quit after that.
Although This is in large part what the new film looks to be based on, which is interesting.
Yes, in bits. Yeah, so it like that ends with dealing with Spider-Man's identity being out there, and
I mean,
well, I just
there's the spell. That's pretty much the same shot for the trailer. You know, where
Oh,
Doctor
yeah,
Strange is
yeah.
doing the spell,
yeah.
and it's taking a lot from this book.
Well, that's actually a little bit different because that spell isn't what fixes it for him because it's that's where Mephisto came into it, isn't it?
This
Mephisto
is where he sends. So he sends Doctor Strange sends him to different timelines, to try and stop Aunt May from being
to
killed.
get help, yeah, but it doesn't
So
actually work.
So this is the kind of, I suppose this is to some extent introducing the multiverse, because this is, different. He goes to different universes to try and get help, and then yes, then we get to the point with Mephisto where he trades.
Yeah, so Doctor Strange does a spell, and I think it's not just different universe. He just sends an astral plane, so like you leave your body like Hulk did in Endgame.
Yeah.
And Doctor Strange does in his films. I think he just sends them around to other people in the universe to get help.
Yes, yeah, he goes to Reed Richards and
Yeah, and all of them try to, which I think so. Maybe come back to that at the end of this run, but within this run, a lot of things are covered. One of my favorite things from this run is so with Spider-Man, a lot of it is if you just jump in. Now it's hard to find the exact ones, but if you Google them, you will find them. There is like 2 issues there, 5 issues there, where there's a little self-contained story, and one of my favorite ones. It goes in that run. So with the new renumbering, it's 51 Amazing Spider-Man 51 to 54 Volume 2, or in the grand scheme of things, it's issue 492 to 495. And so it's like 4 or 5. What's that? 4, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 issues. And it's a character that's introduced there that I won't say anything about really. But if you wanted to just read 4 issues of a Spider-Man story, that it has a big kind of reveal about how he thinks of all his superhero people, even though they're not involved in it. But it has Spider-Man using science, it's Spider-Man using his strength and speed. Like a lot of people would say Spider-Man in universe would say Spider-Man is one of the best fighters ever because he's got strength, speed, agility, and he fights in such an erratic way that people can't really deal with him. So he instinctively fights very smart, but he also then can use his science. Like Spider-Man in the comics is noted as being like in the comic universe, there's like Reed Richards, Tony Stark are like 2 of the smartest people, and Doctor Doom are the smartest people. Tony Stark is probably behind them 2, but then Spider-Man is like they would say, and that comes into it in Dan Slott's run, like, but it's always been there. Spider-Man is one of the smartest people in the Marvel universe, which Tom Holland, you get a little because he's able to make the web fluid and stuff, but they don't really get it across like that. He is incredibly smart.
Yeah.
But sorry, in that run, there's like Amazing Spider-Man 503 to 504. Now you have to go really look at it to get the renumberings. There's so 503 to 504 is 2-issue story with Loki. It's a nice little small self-contained story. I read it after watching the Loki show. Loki's not really being a villain. They're actually kind of working together. If there are other ones there. But there's a lot of big Spider-Man stories in that run. It does end so similar to No Way Home. Spider-Man's secret identity is released, but how it's released is through the Civil War universe-wide crossover event. But J.M. Michael Straczynski's Spider-Man leading up to Mephisto in that story. So again, as I said, it was an editorial choice how they finished it. But Spider-Man, I think it's called Back in Black. It's a part of that run. Mm-hmm. It's just Spider-Man, his identity's out there and he has to kind of deal with that. And it also deals with, in more specifics, so Tony Stark basically in Civil War pushes Spider-Man to reveal his identity. So Dan has a lovely shot of it there. As a part of the Superhuman Registration Act, then it goes terribly badly, obviously. And there's some great issues involved in that. But the actual solo series, every time there's a big event in comics, so like Civil War, House of M, there's always like tie-in issues. And sometimes, a writer could be having a great run on a story and then they have to we have to do some story relating to this big crossover event, which kind of ruins it. But I think that they're the kind of big hitters really for Spider-Man. There's a lot more to go into, but they're kind of the bigger hitters.
The next big one for me after the Straczynski run is a Dan Slott run. I think that would be
Yeah.
remiss not to mention that. Following One More Day is Brand New Day, which is a kind of reintroduction of. It's a soft reboot, I guess. It's probably the best way to describe it. It's not the origin again, but it is a fresh start. You know, it is a
Yeah.
kind of clean slate, fresh start, good jumping in point. A character that's already been established, obviously, and has on his history, but it's kind of like, right, this one for me, it's kind of like if you've got a kind of casual knowledge of Spider-Man, like, you know, Uncle Ben, you know, Gwen Stacy, Goblin, you know, you kind of know the highlights, you can jump in here and kind of be good. You would be missing out on a lot of good stuff for the Straczynski run, though. I would still recommend that. But yeah, no, it's a good run. Dan Slott's run is solid.
Dan
And then
Slott.
that leads into Superior, right?
Yeah, and that's like another 10-year run on the story. Like I haven't read very much of Dan Slott, to be honest with you. I've some like I think maybe after this we might I'll just kind of highlight a few kind of random issues here and there. Yeah, the Dan Slott run. It was kind of around like kind of when he came in is when I kind of took my like leave of absence from comic books for about 10 years of like reading them regularly. I'd read some stuff. There's some runs. So again, like the main line of Spider-Man is Amazing Spider-Man, but then there's like titles like I mentioned before, like Peter Parker Spider-Man, the Spectacular Spider-Man. There's a lot of runs in there like that kind of coincide, but Amazing Spider-Man is like how would we call it?
The cream of the chop, the cherry.
Not it's more like the flagship title. Like it's always been running. Like
okay.
the Spectacular Spider-Man, Parker Spider-Man, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. There's always these runs that go alongside it, but the Amazing Spider-Man is the main run of Spider-Man.
Okay. That's cleared up a lot actually. So like, if the main run is the Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but then sometimes what happens is like most recently with Amazing Spider-Man, there was Nick Spencer was doing it, and I think people liked it at first, but then it kind of got a bit boring. And I think, from my view, what they do is they give these other like Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Who is that now? That's Tom Taylor. So Tom Taylor, that's very recent. Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man by Tom Taylor. It's not a very long run, but it's when I was kind of doing this homework of trying to get back into Spider-Man, the two ones that came up were Tom Taylor, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, and Chip Zdarsky, Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, which actually comes first. That's from 2017. So they're two very modern runs of Spider-Man that are very well received. I think the Chip Zdarsky one was cancelled, but he has then. I'll come back to that point. There's a lot of Chip Zdarsky Spider-Man in recent years that his Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, only ran for like. In the renumbering, it's 1, but it's actually Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man 291. So yeah, there's all these other subheadings that like will go for 200 issues and then stop, or they'll pick it up again. But the Amazing Spider-Man is always going. And Tom Taylor, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, that comes in. I think that's 2019 or 18. Not fully sure on that one.
That sounds about right.
But yeah, so I don't know. I might just mention some random issues here and there.
Yeah,
that kind of feature other characters.
I was going to like, is there any ones that pop out of your mind where Venom is? Because Venom's quite a popular character now, or used. Because you were talking earlier about like what your favourite villain was. One was Doc Ock. Yours was Green Goblin. Where did Venom? Is Venom just not? I thought Venom was a kind of.
I'd actually say some of the best Venom stuff is actually in the Ultimate run. I would say.
Yeah.
I really enjoy Venom in those books. Yeah. I think he's really he feels like a presence in those books, even when he's not there. He kind of feels like a kind of looming presence. Whereas in the main story, he does kind of. I mean, Venom was very 90s, and 90s Spider-Man comics is
90s, so
not a great time. So
I think I marked that out somewhere.
If you're wanting to go into Venom and enjoy it and have a good story, I'd say go for the Ultimate Comics.
Go for the Ultimates.
So there was the original Secret Wars is where Spider-Man got the black suit, but it didn't start becoming like, and I was actually just reading something about it recently. When Spider-Man had the black suit, so like if you were to, and sorry, just briefly on the cartoons, the 90s cartoon and Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon that I think they might both, well, Spectacular might be on Netflix, it was for a while. They both really like used the comics as inspiration. But Venom kind of came in, so there was the black suit. But I think when the black suit was there in the comics, it's not like in the cartoon. It didn't actually make him angry or bad. You know, it didn't affect his personality. It has since they've gone back to rediscover that. Since they've gone back over that time, they have kind of touched on that. But yeah, so Todd McFarlane in the 90s, so he's the black suit, comes in for a couple of issues they have. He's the black suit, so it jumps around. So that's like Amazing Spider-Man 252 to 259, then 298, 300, 315 to 317, and it jumps around a lot. So he has the black suit, then it becomes that Venom story. The Eddie Brock gets the suit. That's all. I think that's all Todd McFarlane. There's some Carnage stuff there in the 90s. Another one. I don't know if we got to yet. We mentioned before recording, Dan. Marvel Knights Spider-Man is like a Venom specific story.
That's Marvel Knights there. This isn't the Mark Miller though. This is the Matt Kent or Kent.
Okay, that's different from what I was.
But as a part of the same story, I don't think Venom's really prominent in this one.
Shows the art.
Oh, the art's gorgeous. It's a nice.
Is that? I can't really see.
Marco Rudy.
Oh, that's a different Marvel Knights than the one I know.
Is it not part of the same? Is it a spin-off? I don't know.
There's a 12-issue run. Yeah, Marvel Knights by Mark Miller.
Yeah, this is different because this is 2013. Mark Miller was before that, right?
Oh yeah. So Marvel Knights is kind of like, it's like when they had like Baywatch Nights. Marvel Knights is kind of like everything's a bit grittier and stuff. But there was a 12-issue run, I think from around the mid-noughties. It was probably from around the same time as Michael Straczynski. Which, you know, like when you get these other runs that aren't the Amazing Spider-Man run, it is set in the same continuity, but it's just a different story, different artist. It can have a different tone. Marvel Knights is kind of like, it's a little bit more adult, but not really.
Yeah.
It is. It's a more mature tone. So
it's still cheesy, but yeah, it's not quite Punisher Max, but it's
yeah, it's just darker and like you're guaranteed to have some character having cancer. It's just, you know, stuff like that. But that was a cool. Like I'd say, looking back on it now, it might be a little bit like a lot of Mark Miller stuff. It's looking back now, it's like, oh, this is so fucking edgy, but like, it's fun. The art is quite cool. All like Spider-Man, like every couple of years, they just, you know, they will have new characters and you have like convoluted runs that go nowhere, but they always bring it back to the original villains. And like, let's say there's a Sinister more than 6 in that run, and it's just the art's cool. He gets some really good action fights in it. Gets some Marvel Knights. I'll just quickly jump around for some classic issues over Amazing Spider-Man. There's... Okay, I put these here. There's The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, which is 248. I won't say much about it. It's just a nice... I think it's like... Yeah, it's one issue from Amazing Spider-Man. It's a classic. That's where somewhere like Marvel Unlimited, just to go back and get a random issue from way back when. It's just... It's one of the most iconic Spider-Man stories there is.
Yeah. I've not read
that. There's a fan film that's being made at the moment called Spider-Man Lotus.
Ooh.
And it takes inspiration from that and Spider-Man Blue, which I might go back to you on that, Dan, in a moment. So it takes issues from them. There's The Unstoppable Juggernaut, which is like, it's again in Amazing Spider-Man 229 and 230. It's just 2 issues of Spider-Man fighting Juggernaut. It's probably from like the 70s or early 80s. It's just, you know, you really get that sense of Spider-Man as a hero. Like, he's the unstoppable Juggernaut, and it's Spider-Man. As strong as Spider-Man is, he ain't doing shit to Juggernaut. So he's just throwing everything at him. And it features one of my J. Michael Straczynski does it. There's this effect they do with Spider-Man. They do it with other characters who are super fast too, where they'll show like the main Spider. So the image would be like Spider-Man and Juggernaut, but then there's all these other kind of slightly less detailed Spider-Mans
Yeah.
to try and get across the effect of how fast he's moving and all the different things he's doing. It would have been great to have that image up. Maybe I'll look that up because that's a visual Spider-Man trope. Now it's done with other characters who are. It's done with other Spider-Man characters, or sorry, super fast characters. But it's one of the Spider. I've just seen it with Spider-Man a lot, and it just trying to get across the sense of how fast he is. But also, yeah, that's the main thing: is his speed and agility. I'll just try and get it up here on my phone quickly. But yeah, that's just 2 issues. And it's Madam Web, if you might know from the cartoons.
Yeah, Madam Web, yeah.
It's basically Juggernaut is trying to get her, and Spider-Man has to stop him. Actually, I have that image here. So that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So that and a lot of times you'll see this too. Maybe they'll all be fully detailed. Maybe one Spider-Man will be fully detailed, and the rest are kind of faded. But it just kind of gets that sense across of his speed. Then there's the Commuter Comet, which sounds very dramatic, but it's just Spider-Man out in the sticks. He's out in like not even Queens, it's somewhere further out, where he doesn't have buildings to web sling on. And it's that scene in Spider-Man Homecoming where he goes to shoot his web and there's nothing there. That's based on that issue. It's called the Commuter Comet, and he is just chasing. It's Amazing Spider-Man 267, and he's basically just chasing some criminal out to the sticks or out to the suburbia, and it's a comedy basically. It's just like you can really read that as treat that as like a little film. One more just on kind of random issues is Flowers for Rhino, which to come from all these different titles, there was a series which I think still could be going in some way, Spider-Man's Tangled Web, which is where they brought in like indie artists and like maybe a lot of the English artists would have worked on 2008 AD. That's actually a different one, I think.
Oh really?
But does that have like different artists every issue or every couple of issues?
Yes, looks like it. Yeah.
Is the Flowers for Rhino in that?
This is volume 3. It's collecting.
Probably not then.
Nah, Heartbreaker, The Collaborator.
Yeah, because with a lot of these subtitles, like they just have different volumes of them and they're stretched out over years. But the original run of Spider-Man's Tangled Web, it's actually issues 5 and 6. Oh my god, I should have wrote down the names of the artists. But it's basically, if you've seen Homer, the episode of The Simpsons where Homer gets the crayon up his nose and it accidentally makes him smarter.
Yeah.
But then he gets too smart, and then he doesn't. He wants to get made dumb, but dumb again, but dumber than he was before. So the original, it's based on a novel called Flowers for Algernon, and it has been adapted a lot. But it's basically a 2-issue story where the Rhino goes through the same process, and it's great. It's just I read it as a kid. And it always stuck with me. I've recently kind of found it again through Marvel Unlimited, and it's just a great little story. It's a little kind of snapshot of Rhino, and that's it for. There's other ones, but like there's a lot of little ones you could just pick up there. Will we maybe touch on like the graphic novels? So there's like Craven's Last Hunt.
Mm-hmm.
It's a story that was originally written for Batman, I think, but then DC didn't want it, so they made it a Spider-Man story.
Oh, cool! I don't know that.
And it's just it's something you can pick up, and it just gives you a good snapshot of Craven.
Yeah. Yep. They did a sequel. I read that recently. I didn't know they'd done a sequel until
Grim
recently.
Hunt, is it?
Oh, it was all. I can't remember what it was called, but it was garbage. Absolute garbage, man. Awful. Really, really bad.
Other than that, Spider-Man Blue. Would you like to speak about that, Dan?
Spider-Man Blue is my favourite Spider-Man comic. I think for the main reason being it is Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. This is after they did Long Halloween and Dark Victory. They then tackled a bunch of other characters. They did Superman for all seasons, and then they went over to Marvel and they did something in the kind of same vein. They did Hulk green, Daredevil yellow, and Spider-Man blue. I've not read the Hulk one. The Daredevil one's pretty solid, but for me, Spider-Man Blue's definitely the best one. In all these books, I'd say everything that they worked on together post Long Halloween. Um, they they tell a kind of story with a beginning, a middle, and an end that you can pick up, you can follow. You don't need to know the character, but there's this presence of this reference to the character and everything he's been through. And Spider-Man Blue really is that, because it opens with Spider-Man clearing out his attic. You know, he's a few years into his career. I don't know if he's married to Mary Jane yet, but he's living with her. You know, he's kind of he's a bit older. He's maybe about
Living
30.
in sin.
And he is going through his old kind of photo albums and things like that, and he gets reminded, obviously, of Gwen Stacy, who's been dead for 10 years, whatever at this point. So it's a really kind of nostalgic, reminiscent story that still has dynamic art and action, because Tim Sale's, it'd be a waste not to have that with Tim Sale. But it's also this really kind of emotional, heartfelt story as well, and I think that's what Spider-Man is. It's a mix between, to me, that's what a good Spider-Man story is. It's a mix between, dynamic action with this fast, strong guy that's also got this kind of emotional tie to it. And I think that book straddles that balance really well. And it's a gorgeous book as well, art-wise. I could stare at Tim Sale's art all day.
I'd read it in those English reprints, but I'd never really. It's a long time since I've read it, but it is beautiful.
Recreation of the classic cover as well in the snow, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like Spider-Man is a sad sack. He's a lot of he's neurotic. He's one of the most neurotic superheroes there is.
He's a super tragic character, and I think this book tackles that without being soppy. Do you know what I mean? It feels. You still feel bad for him. Like sometimes you're kind of like, stop moaning, mate. Go over it. Do you know what I mean? Let's move on. Whereas here, you really do feel the kind of loss and the sadness that he kind of carries for Gwen Stacy, and
he's a very melancholic character. That's why I kind of like the Raimi films, because like people are like, oh, Spider-Man's all blah blah. I was like, no, the reason Spider-Man makes jokes in his own lore is to distract the villains, and he only started doing it because he was terrified of fighting people. Like it's an added side effect that it distracts people, but he's only doing it to try and calm himself. And he's constantly he's as neurotic as they come. He's a neurotic New Yorker, like.
He's also, at the end of this book's really dark. He's leaving a message to Gwen, kind of from beyond the grave, and MJ walks in, and he's like, how long have you been listening? And she's like, it's fine. She's like, say hello to me and tell her I miss her too. And then. Wow. Yeah, like the last thing he does is click off the tape player, and there's a Polaroid of them on top of it, and it's just I just think it really kind of hits that emotional point that you're looking for when you're looking for a Spider-Man story, while still being entertaining and not just being sappy.
And it's kind of like it's a modern conversation about, so like, not that I've read it, but the night Gwen Stacy died kind of changed comic books in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. It kind of brought a maturity to them that maybe wasn't there. Like, no one had done that before. Like, in the 90s, it became, what was the term? I can't remember. Was it Gail Simone? Called it fridging. Where, it was a trope to kill off the hero's love interest. It's like, it's called fridging because Green Lantern...
Yeah, somebody died in a fridge, right?
He came home and his missus was shoved in a fridge by one of his villains.
Yeah.
Or chopped up or something.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So it became a trope, but like back in the 70s, I think. That was like John Romita Sr. That just had a big effect on comics worldwide, but like America-wide or New York-wide, because I think DC's offices were in New York too.
I also think, though, to some extent, I agree with you, it did change comics, but because of the time that book was written and came out, the night Gwen Stacy died, they didn't really tackle a lot of the emotional baggage and the discussions of it. It was more just, ha ha ha, I killed your love, Spider-Man, and he was all, I'm going to get you for this goblin. And it was really kind of surface level pain. Yeah. Whereas Blue really delves into what that did to him as a character in the long term. Yeah. And how it's something that he's probably never going to get over. And I mean, he is just the most unlucky guy in the world, isn't he? Like his uncle,
Yeah.
his missus, everybody cops it. Aunt May in One More Day. Do you know what I mean? But I don't know. I think Blue really. It's almost like a therapy session. Do you know what I mean? It almost is like
Yeah.
him dealing with shit that's been in his head for years and getting to kind of be in the inside of that. It really feels like you have a connection to the character, and Jeff Loeb's writing really helps with that as well. I think he's a really
Yeah. I
in that sense.
I think like we were kind of like we kind of mentioned before, but it's maybe kind of a very good example of it. With these characters that like you can come back to again, you can come back to in different continuities, or it's the same continuity but slightly rebooted. You can get it, like you can get so much. That's why Spider-Man like it's been retold so many times, but you can touch on stuff there that you might have a sense of in one piece of media or one comic or whatever, but you can come back to it, and
Yeah.
knowing kind of what happens isn't really a spoiler because you can see the story treated in a different way.
Yeah, 100%.
Like there's one issue in which I guess they kind of touched on at the end of Homecoming where Aunt May, he's like taking off his mask, and then Aunt May is at the door just before the film finishes. She goes, "What the fuck?" That's really touched on, and they just glossed over it then in Far From Home.
Yeah.
There's a issue in J.M. Michael Straczynski's run, and even within the comics, Aunt May has found out Peter Parker was Spider-Man many times.
Yeah.
Or there's like even in the Sam Raimi films, she's kind of goes like there's very leading like okay, she fucking knows, like she totally knows. But there's an issue where I can't even remember who he's fighting, and it's like at the end of this big arc, but it was just like a cliffhanger of. In the J.M. Michael Straczynski run, he just comes home, he's fucking destroyed, he's bandaged up, he's like just passes out on his bed covered in blood. At the end of the issue, Aunt May comes in and sees him in his costume, battered and beaten. But then the next issue, I think it could be mainly focused on Aunt May just walking around town thinking about all these different things, now knowing like, oh, now that makes perfect sense. And then she comes back and they have a conversation. And it's just that's all told in one issue. You wouldn't even really need to have read the issue before.
There's the moment that she kind of stands over him, holding the costume.
You tilt it a bit because you can kind of it's from the view. Yeah, so that's Spider-Man like on his bed, isn't it, or on his couch?
Yeah. I'm lying in the bed.
Yeah, it's just the shine is kind of ignoring it. But yeah, so that is, and like if you were to skim, like that's at the end of a big story arc where that happens, and the next issue is these. Just very condensed one issue stories that get a lot across. Like I think another good way, like if you listen to a podcast like this, might be hard to take down everything, but just even Google Spider-Man one shots, best Spider-Man solo stories. Like one issue story just gets a lot across. Could be treated as a film by itself, or could be adapted to a film by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, is there anything else? As far as solo issues, there's a really good. Now this is just random. Amazing Spider-Man 578, 579. I think it's in and around the Dan Slott run. Right. It's just 2 issues where he's fighting the Shocker, and like he gets on the train, and there's like he sees some girl or whatever. He's kind of flirting with her or whatever. That's not even really the point. But he just gets on the train. There's like a structural collapse and they're trapped in the train, and then like he just in the time it happens, the train car he's on, he managed to just get his mask on, and like there's just a kind of reveal image of Spider-Man holding the fucking all the rubble is falling down and is crushing the train. He's just holding it up, and what it turns out to be is there's a jury for a court case on the train for some mob guy, and they've hired the Shocker to kill them. And then it basically ends up with Spider-Man. He doesn't even like they fight a little bit, but it's more about all these people are trapped under all the rubble, water's filling up. Spider-Man has to get them out of there. He does fight Shocker, but it's more that he's trying to save people. And like 2 issues, I'm not sure the art is beautiful art. There isn't even a lot of Spider-Man runs where it's just like it'll be 2 issues where a different artist comes in. And it's like he'll be fighting. It'll be a self-contained story where he's fighting one of his main characters. I know from around that time there's a Sandman story which looks similar, but I haven't got to it yet myself. Other than that, I think this kind of goes back to the graphic novel thing. Chip Zdarsky has done, so as I mentioned, Spectacular Spider-Man from 2017. He's done Spider-Man Life Story,
Right.
which is like a summary of, it treats Spider-Man from the 60s. It's an issue per decade, but things move in real time.
Yeah.
So it kind of summarizes a lot of stories, but it's, yeah, just 6 issues. Dan, you read it, I believe?
I think I have, a few years ago. I don't have it to hand, but yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
a good story, though, good run. A good kind of highlights reel
Yeah.
of the character.
It's the kind of thing where you could read it, like, it would potentially spoil some of the older stuff. But, like, it just teaches every, so he ages he gets 10 years older all the time. Like Civil War from the comics, that's placed during Vietnam.
Yeah.
And they kind of tie it back into that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's clever.
Another one is kind of like a what if, which again is Chip Zdarsky. Spider-Man: The Spider Shadow, which is a what if. Like there is a classic what if Spider-Man didn't get rid of the black suit, but this is like a 6-issue, basically horror comic. I haven't even finished it yet because I'm reading on Marvel Unlimited, which is like 3 months behind. So it is completed now, but it's just beautiful art, and it's just like basically, if you know Spider-Man had the Venom suit at one point, that's all you need to know. It just modernizes it, tells it it's very dark. Is there anything else? I'm trying to think. I know there's another Chip Zdarsky story that I just can't think of.
See, I'm very much, I think because I like the physical books, I'm very much a guy that will wait until, like, I've read a wee bit of Spider Shadow digitally, but I kind of read a bit and went, do you know what? I'm going to wait for the trade, because that is just my preferred way to kind of consume it. I like doing it all in one go.
Yeah.
So
it's
that's
annoying when you read like 4 issues and then you forget what the
which
again.
It does, to be honest, sometimes it does feel a bit like I kind of constantly have a hole in my comics knowledge in terms of current books, because I don't keep up with current books. When a trade comes out, the book's usually about a year old, so all my knowledge is a year out of date. But yeah, I don't know. I just my days of collecting single issues are behind me. Like, I used to do that shit, and then I don't have the space. I don't have the space for fucking trade paperwork. Never mind single issues. Do you know what I mean? And it's just
stop. Yeah.
So,
but you kind of have
to you could just read digital, and I'm just stubborn and I like having a paper copy. But
you can. I think, but to be honest, though, there's just so many fucking comics that you have to wait for the dust to settle and see. Is it good? Like, if you start collecting something and you're 65 or whatever, 20 single issues in, and then everyone's like, "Oh, this shit is really boring. I hate this run." You're like, okay, I've just spent what, €3-4 or £4 or £5, whatever, an issue. Like, sorry, comics, you make too much of yourselves. So I literally can't read everything. Like,
not to mention that single issues are getting more and more expensive.
Yeah.
I seen that. I was in just briefly the other day in Forbidden Planet, and I think it was a DC book. It might have been Suicide Squad or something, and it was $5.99 for one issue. I was like, Jesus, that's steep. The last time, I think the dearest one I bought the first issue of Dark Knight 3, the Master Race, and that was like $7.99, and I thought that was outrageous. And I just, that's the other reason for buying trades. I think it's just to invest in single, especially a hard copy of single issues. It's too expensive now. It's an expensive hobby.
Oh, stop! Yeah, like I'd feel a bit funny going into the my brother. As I was saying, my brother bought all the comics when I was younger. My friend did. Then this guy who was a pirate gave me lots of comics. And so, like, I'm going into there's a comic book shop now in Dublin. I'm going into it. I try and I'm reading Marvel Unlimited, and like, it's just, I'm trying to talk about how much you know about comics, but try not to let on that. Like, they must know. They must have some idea that, like, but I said to someone, like, I get Marvel now, or I get Marvel Unlimited, and the guy was like, oh yeah, I know. It's like, I shouldn't be talking about Marvel Unlimited, but I'm like, I literally couldn't afford to buy everything. I will get Unlimited. At least with Unlimited, I see I'm giving money to Marvel or Disney, which, whatever. But like, I base so much of my identity on Marvel that I have to
That
give them
is
some money. But I am
that
trying
is
to buy comics from comic book shops. But like it's too expensive to buy everything.
But that is the other thing when I was mentioning earlier about buying used books. Obviously, if you're going through eBay, you're not giving any money to Marvel. You're not giving any money to comic book shops, but you are giving money to independent sellers, which you kind of need to decide that as well. I think that has a bearing on where you want to put your money. Do you want to give it to a massive corporation? Do
Yeah.
you want to give it to a local business? Do you just want the cheapest, the cheapest version of it? It's
Yeah.
that's something else to think about as well.
And it's like it's something I am trying to like. So I am even buying one single issue. I have a pull list now, which I never had before in my life. So I'm buying Time Before Time, the
Right.
Declan Shalvey book. I
Yeah.
feel like a freak going in there because I always there's that comic book shop. I always just buy Declan Shalvey stuff, and I'm obsessed with Declan Shalvey because he's an Irish artist, and I've met him, and he's sound, and
All right. Cool.
he drew me a commission of Banshee at fucking Dublin Comic Con a couple of years ago. So
Nice.
far, most comics that I've bought, or even from that comic book shop, any books I've bought in there are like Declan Shalvey books. I'm like, okay, I have to
That's
start
cool.
buying some other stuff. But yeah, but look, it's tough. I would say get them digitally. Try and buy the ones you like. Like if I wasn't doing digitally, or if I hadn't been pirating for X amount of years, I wouldn't have bought any comics. So
Yeah.
I think it's kind of with the prices being the way they are. I will, and especially in the last couple of years, I have bought I shouldn't be buying them off Amazon. I should be buying them from comic book shops, but I am getting there. And if I hadn't bought the ones where I bought them secondhand or from Amazon or by pirating, I wouldn't be buying any of the books that I'm buying now,
100%.
which isn't a crazy amount, but
No, I agree. I agree with that because, as you said, you might not want to spend, you might not want to pay through the nose, but you're not sure if this is something that's going to grab you. But
yeah,
if you go for the cheapest, maybe Amazon or eBay or whatever option, and it does hook you, then it might be a gateway to be like, right, okay, let's support this, medium
yeah.
on a bigger scale. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that either.
Yeah, so I think we've covered quite a bit of Spider-Man.
Yep.
Really have.
Um,
I'm really glad that you actually clarified like where it actually the continuity is with the Amazing Spider-Man. That is the actual main run, and everything from it is kind of like other kind of sections and things like other stories.
yeah,
That's
Yeah.
kind of cleared me because I was like, there's so many. Like, which one's the one that people
different
follow?
titles. But then you also have what they call it a run is when one writer, like it might even be the same writer all the time. Say there could be like the GM Michael Straczynski 471 545. He might write every issue himself. The artist mightn't be the same every issue. That's why I'm really blessed to feel to have read the English reprints because my brother bought them the English reprints growing up because they'd put 3 issues in. And they wouldn't all just be Amazing Spider-Man. They'd be like 2 Amazing Spider-Man, 1 classic. Next week it'd be 2 Spectacular Spider-Man, or fucking 3 Spectacular Spider-Man. So you get across it that way. Which them comics actually still exist. It's a hard to find a jumping on point, but the English reprints, they're not a bad way to go. If you want to kind of, you don't have as much selection because you're kind of just going with. I don't know. I guess there may be only I think they've closed the gap on American comics. They're maybe a year behind them, but it's still kind of curated reading.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a knowledge fest.
A lot. Honorable mentions. There's some like big team up books. Like I did mention Civil War, House of M. They not well. Spider-Man isn't the main character. He is focused on and given a nice bit of treatment there. Avengers versus X-Men, in particular, round 9. It really shows Spider-Man going up against that happens a lot with Spider-Man. He goes up against these unstoppable things. But the big story is Avengers fighting X-Men. Dark Reign, which sees Norman Osborn basically taking over Shield in relation to another story where he was kind of shown to be the hero, even though he really wasn't. It's like the main bad guy, Wolverine. Well, it's kind of spoilers, but Norman Osborn basically gets to be Iron Man and Nick Fury at the same time, and he gets like an Iron Man costume, which you would have seen in when Rhodey gets the American teamed Iron Man
Iron Man
costume.
2, right? Iron Man 3?
Iron Man.
3.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3.
That design comes from Norman Osborn. He amalgamized
Okay.
Iron Man and Captain America to become the Iron Patriot. And he basically just had knockoff Iron Man armor, and the Avengers were on the run, and then Norman Osborn. Spider-Man kind of gets sidelined because it's more Cap and Iron Man who kind of fighting them in this, but Norman Osborn gets like Bullseye to pretend to be Hawkeye.
Yeah.
Venom, who's actually Scorpion in the Venom costume. He gets the Venom suit for a while. He's the Spider-Man of the team. Wolverine's evil son is the Wolverine of the team.
Draken.
Yeah. And there's a couple other characters there, but it's just that's not exactly Spider-Man centric, but it just shows Norman Osborn he gets leveled up to be
Dark Reign, not to be confused with Spider-Man Reign, which is the one where he gives Mary Jane cancer through his
radioactive
Yeah.
sperm. Yeah. It's kind of like Marvel's answer to the Dark Knight. It's like a future, dark future of Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, I don't really remember thinking much of it. Very recently, and we were just past Halloween at time of recording, but there's been a lot of Marvel Zombies, but there was a very recent Marvel Zombies Resurrection, which is only like 5 issues, but like Peter Parker's the main character, along with a couple of other survivors, random like Forge from the X-Men, and I don't know, there's like a villain or two with them, but like Peter is the main guy. And very recently, not Dark Reign. What's the one? Tom Taylor?
Christ, what's it called? The one where there's no power.
I nearly think it's Dark Reign again.
No, it's not.
Fucking reviewed it.
What's it called again? Dark Ages.
Dark Ages, yeah. So Dark Ages is an alternate reality. Like they kind of
Dark Ages.
They just take like it's very similar to our Marvel universe, but this ancient being was encapsulated in the earth. So way back in the universe, this being was created to destroy any threats in the universe by some godlike figure. It started eating black holes, but then got corrupted by the dark holes and started. It was called the Unmaker, and it started unmaking everything. So this godlike Marvel, the living tribunal, which you don't have to go into, this is a long fucking convoluted thing. But he couldn't destroy this character, but he put it out of commission, and then he encased it in the earth. So in this reality, this big fucking mad robot thing is in the earth. It wakes up, it starts trying to break out of the earth. The earth's going to be destroyed. Long story short, one character opens a portal to a EMP universe, which stops the robot again. But the character who opened that portal is killed before they can close the portal. So basically, all power in the world is gone. But then it goes like 7 years. Peter Parker is like the main character one of the main characters in that.
Guess what? See, in that Eternals movie, pretty much the same story.
Oh my god, no way. Is that
actually strange that they came out so close together, because that would have been written before that comic was written, I'd say.
It's pretty much the same script. There's a Celestial that is in the middle of the Earth that is going to hatch and destroy the Earth, and they have to stop that from happening. That's kind of the plot of Eternals,
Since Venom 2, I've done it with Eternals 2. I've watched breakdown videos before watching them. I never used to do with Marvel films. So that's 2. I'm like, I could see it, but like it's not out yet. Like I'm gonna get to it today. So
Eternals is okay. It's worth seeing. Just to give my quick thoughts on that, it is the most disconnected Marvel film that they've released so far. It could take place before they kind of mentioned Thanos a couple of times as you've seen in the trailers, but see, other than that, this could take place anywhere in the timeline. Like this could have took place at any point, like before Civil War, before the first Avengers. It could have took place during Loki. Like it really didn't matter when this film, which might be a benefit. Some people, if you're a bit sick of kind of Loki and ties to other shows, and you need to have seen this to see that.
Yeah.
That kind of thing Marvel have got going. If you're sick of that, then this might be better for you because it's less connected. But if you're looking for something, that is kind of like keeping the whole momentum going for the MCU, it doesn't really do that because it is very separate.
Yeah.
But it's an entertaining movie. It's fine. It's good. It's solid.
So
Yeah.
positive.
It was
It's an entertaining movie.
I wish it would have went a bit harder on the whole existentialism. They threaten it. They kind of, we're going to go existential here and question their existence. Oh no, just CGI Marvel fight. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, kind of does that a fair amount of times. Chris, your camera's gone.
There's Chris gone.
No, he's back.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, Chris, you dropped out
his audio's
audio
gone.
wise.
Wait, what about now?
Oh, he's back.
Yeah, you're good.
Fucking refresh something on my keyboard. What were you saying? You cut out. What were you saying?
I was just saying how it's. Listen, it's okay. I wish they could have. They don't have the guts to follow through on. They basically discuss the birth of the universe, right? We learn how the universe, how basically, in the MCU, why humans exist and where we came from, and why these guys exist. And it's like, we're going to ask. Like, there's points in this movie where they're staring pretty much their version of God in the face. And you're like, this is pretty existential for a Marvel film. And then we'll kind of snap back to like big CGI monsters and lasers. And you're like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, it's an MCU movie. Do you know,
you have to go back there.
It kind of reminds you a few times. It's okay. It's okay.
I think, as I was saying last episode when we were talking about I mentioned about Captain America: Civil War. I think all Winter Soldier. For me, all the Marvel films, if they're like, oh, it's a superhero film, but it's also this, they never go that hard on this. And if if you want to watch a film, if you want to watch a heist film, don't watch an Ant-Man because it's not a good heist film. It's a serviceable superhero film. Like, and even I know that you were saying Winter Soldier is one of your favorites, but I don't think it's a great espionage film. Really, it's more superhero. It's espionage light.
Yeah.
That was what I think. And I can imagine that's existential light.
Yeah.
It's a flavour of it, but it's not really the same thing.
Yeah, pretty much. Right.
Well, that's it, I think, is it?
Chris, before we go, do you have any questions do you have anything left that you're wondering in terms of Spider-Man? Comics, where it started.
I was kind of like shocked with like when you said like Venom was like kind of pushed aside in the 90s. He's kind of mixed in with that mash because Venom for me is like he's like the main, like he's man-made villain. So
Venom.
So it's like
I would say somewhat that Venom has survived in terms of like pop culture. The reason he survived as a character is not because of the comics; it's because of
the popularity of the role.
I think the 90s cartoon and the
cartoon
and the video games, it's because of other media. I think that Venom's kind of.
Yeah. Oh, was it like the original, like the writing for him wasn't that great, and it just was he was like a silly character. That's the way he is in the games and stuff. He's kind of like a silly.
The period where Peter has a symbiote suit and gets rid of it is the best part of that arc. Once it goes on Eddie Brock, it starts to get a bit
shady.
Yeah,
but he was very popular. He was like very 90s. So like, actually, the way and they have brought him back as being a villain a lot. So like, he's been good and he's been bad, but the actual kind of way they treat the Tom Hardy films that came in pretty quick from my knowledge. Like he wasn't actually a villain straight up for that long. He became like an anti-hero for a long. He was just super popular in the 90s. So they put him in everything. And then
read this. If you want to read a good Venom book, just read the Ultimate Spider-Man Venom book.
Everyone leads to the Ultimate Spider-Man.
He's in that.
It's the best Venom story in my opinion.
Oh, that's good.
The story, the period of comics I mentioned, Peter Parker's Spider-Man, written by Howard Mackie in 1999. There's some kind of alright Venom stuff there. Agent Venom, if you want to, is when Flash Thompson former Peter Parker
Yeah,
bully
Yep.
who like ended up losing his legs in like Afghanistan.
Yeah,
But then he, through the government, gets Venom, and he's like
that's right.
Venom, but he's going around with like fucking machine guns and everything. Like it's pretty cool.
The art's cool as well in those
Yeah.
books. Yeah.
One thing from the J. Michael Straczynski run, which I don't think it was very well done, bar maybe one panel. After 9/11, J. Michael Straczynski did a 9/11 issue. It was in Spider-Man, and there's not much dialogue to it. Not an awful lot happens, but it's just basically the heroes show up at Ground Zero and try and help the fucking first responders. It's pretty much it. But it was actually like as surprising as it would sound. It was quite touching.
Yeah.
Right.
Barrett has Doom crying. Doom is just looking. Doom has come to New York and he's just like crying through his mask. I was like, I can't take Doom being now. You know, he's not really going to care that much. Like in the same panel, Kingpin is there, which, as someone in another podcast was saying, it makes sense for Kingpin. Kingpin, his whole thing is that like, even though he's a bad guy, he acts like he cares about New York.
Yeah.
Or Brooklyn or Hell's Kitchen even.
Hell Kitchen, yeah.
He's doing it in a kind of evil way, but he does have that idea in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else from the films or the cartoons? Or, like,
No, I really want to do it because my knowledge does come from the cartoons and the films, so I really want to have like a dive deep on the comics, which was there's so much now. Like because like even if you are struggling to catch up.
Oh god, yeah.
Stuff. There's going to be a hell of a lot for me.
Honestly,
so.
I'd say like if for you, Chris, and for anybody else that's listening to this, it's just look any comic character, any run, any company, whoever it is. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about
Just dive in.
Don't worry about being up to date or reading everything because it's never going to happen. Just pick. The way I would say, Google story arcs and be like, right, okay, this story arc is this issue to this issue, and buy that, read that, or find an artist or a writer that you like and collect their stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like that's kind of that again, like we were talking about Punisher earlier. I got onto Punisher Max because I like Garth Ennis' stuff, and then that became my favourite Punisher run, but not necessarily because of Punisher, but because of the writer. Do you know what I mean? So that can also, and then Spider-Man Blue, I'm talking about Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. I've kind of followed them more than I've followed Spider-Man. That's my favourite Spider-Man story, but it's very distinctly their work, which is more important to me than the fact it's a Spider-Man story. So find an artist that you enjoy. And I don't just mean artist in terms of drawing. I mean a creator. Find an artistic creator that you enjoy and follow their work. That's also a way to tackle it, I think.
There's also that kind of like, it's like if you get a delivery from Tesco and they don't have that item, so they replace it with something else. You'll come across like that Agent Venom one where it's Flash Thompson who's Venom. There's a period around Dark Reign. And I don't know, was that actually in the Marvel Knights too, but where Mac Gargan, so that's the guy who is Scorpion, for I'd say been nearly close to 10 years, he was Venom. He got the Venom suit. The design was kind of different. They changed up the design. And it was cool. Like, because like at that time, Eddie Brock was kind of like a hero. So he wasn't really, like, Venom as a villain isn't actually that long. And he's probably, I'd say, like, Spider-Man, the two cartoons, Spider-Man the 90s, Spectacular Spider-Man, they're also great representations of that character. They take a lot of basis from the comics. And if anything, like I'd say, especially the films will influence the comics more in a lot of cases than, well, they generally, so the Raimi films are very good for early Spider-Man. They really get that across. I think it's, apart from the Venom part, that's why Sam Raimi was only more interested in the older villains. He was kind of forced to have Venom in there. He didn't really want him. But then the 90s cartoon, a lot of that is based on the earlier comics. Spectacular Spider-Man, again, really goes back to the early stuff. It does bring in Venom. But yeah, I would definitely say, like with the cartoons, it's the same with the X-Men cartoons. They're kind of just, like, if you go back and read the comics that the cartoons are based on, they're still aimed at kids. They're dated. So there's not much different. Like some people would shoot me for this, but there's not an awful lot of difference with the '90s cartoon and actually like the Claremont X-Men, and same with the '90s cartoon with Spider-Man. Like they're very dated. They're a very valid form of getting the same kind of stories.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, well that was
brilliant.
an extensive deep dive into
Dense, yeah.
Spider-Man comics.
Cover most things. We probably missed some things in the '70s and '80s. I know, like Roger Stern, Tom DeFalco, Todd McFarlane.
If you guys are watching this or listening to this, and there is a run or even a single issue that we didn't mention that you guys think is relevant, I would like to read it. I'd like to dive into that. So comment, let us know, and we'll take any recommendations that you lot have. Other than that, that's everything for today. So thank you for joining us, guys. Thanks to Jerd for leading that,
leading the charge,
guiding us through the convoluted
one-armed Spider-Man,
convoluted world that is the Spider-Man comics. And thank you, Chris, for being our surrogate man on the street.
To be honest, this is going to be maybe I'll be the man on the street for a lot of them. I'll be like, tell me more. Like,
that's fine. You'll be the relatable one.
I'll be the
relatable one. Gonna.
Oh, Jerd will be the man on the street for the DC one. Me,
oh God,
yeah. So you'll get to feel what it's like.
See, it is. I think. I mean, there's other folk that are going to come out of the podcast, and it's going to be nice to have that kind of range of opinions. But I think the three of us, there's a nice kind of actual dichotomy there because Marvel's kind of Jerd's bag. Chris, you're obviously more DC, and I'm just kind of both. I'm just more kind of spread wide. So
the adapter.
It's quite nice to have that. Do you know what I mean? Have someone that's got kind of a big hole on one side, someone that's got a big hole on the other side, as someone that doesn't really know anything. They just go way through life. So yeah, I think that'd be quite an interesting kind of chat for going through these.
On you go.
I was just going to say, and next week I believe we're going to do Batman.
Yes,
so
that'll be
yes. That'll be a meaty episode, I'm sure. I mean, we already went for nearly 2 hours today, and that was just Spider-Man. So
it seems like more. I think we're touching 3, are we?
No. I saw when the hour mark when I saw Jerd's room go really dark. I was like, "Fuck!" How long have we been here for? It started dead light. I was like, "All right."
That was good, man. There's nothing wrong with getting knee deep in these characters, especially when they're as storied and extensive as Spider-Man's been going for.
Dripping
nearly a century, but Batman's been nearly going for a century. Do you know what I mean? So these kids have been going for a long time. So I think that's right.
There's a lot to it. I think one more honor, like Spider-Man PS4 is one of the best Spider-Man stories ever. Web of Shadows. It's a bit gammy going back to it now.
Web of Shadows! Oh, that was brilliant. That was when they had Wolverine and you could play, like you interacted with Wolverine and stuff.
Yeah,
you fight Wolverine and stuff.
Listen, like we could do it.
We could go
a whole episode on Spider-Man games.
That's a good one.
And I know that if Ian Lynn, American's listening, I know that's his
game.
That's his bread and butter as well. I think he loves Web of Shadows. I know that. But yeah. When we've got other folk on, we'll definitely go through that shit. But I think for today we covered plenty. So thank you for joining us for another episode of the Pop Shock Podcast. I've been Dan. I've been joined by Jerd and Chris.
Lovely.
And we'll see you all next week when we do Batman.
Oh, can't wait.
Cheers.
Okay.
Can't wait.
Goodbye.
See you soon.